Hello, hello. Greetings, greetings.
Hey, good morning / afternoon / evening to everybody.
Good to see you all.
Hans,
All right.
everybody's muted, so you don't expect too much people telling you anything about
Yeah.
it. But
There's
welcome,
waving
everybody.
Exactly. Why is nobody talking back? It's like, I'll have to do the lip sync version of this so we can see what you're saying. That's Michael, that is perfect. Exactly. And then, so did you have to put the dog down, or was it okay? No rabies. Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. You threw it away. Okay. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. I get it. Rough times. Okay. So let's see, we got a couple joining that seem to be taking a while. I think it's because they're far away. Maybe. See how that looks. Rolling down from your neck of the woods. Okay. Greetings, greetings. We're just going to let a couple more people get on board here, folks, and then we'll go ahead and kick off and get started. Just give us a few more minutes. Okay. One more, and we should be all set. Okay. Laura, look good. We can get started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome everyone to Global Data Summit's current interim, I think we can call it an interim platform, which is now a series of speaking events online until such a time as we can get all our lovely faces together in the same place again, which would be fantastic. We'll stick with doing some of these online series. From time to time, you can pop into globaldatasummit.com to see what is new, but also, of course, you can ping us via email just to see what else is going on, I guess, in the conference area. For today, very exciting, we're going to have Roland Voss with us. He is working with Varigence. If you know of BimlFlex, some of you may be working with it. I know from seeing the names here, I know some of you are somewhat familiar with both Roland, with Varigence, with BimlFlex. And as we've been talking about for quite some time, and I think this is the topic du jour for data warehousing in general, is how are we working with the business to gain business models that we now understand are really the heartbeat of data warehousing and enterprise integration. I know I can see Michael, can't hear what he says, but I know he's on board and he's happy with this. Certainly a lot of the people here that I see on board are aware of it. This is an exciting time. I think Roland can talk to us about how we can take kind of business modeling, business mapping to relate to operational and warehouse data in a meaningful way. And I know I'm paraphrasing that poorly, Roland, but I wanted to give all the punchline to you as we head in. With us today, also Laura here with Global Data Summit. You may have seen emails from her. So if there's, again, anything you need concerning, hello, Laura, did you want to say hello?
No, hello, everybody. And if anybody wants to do this again, we'll be back in 12 hours.
Yes, much to everybody's happiness, right? We'll be back. And I think, Laura, everyone is muted, but when we get to the Q&A time, and maybe you want to recap that as well before we get into it. When we get to the Q&A time, you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand and unmute for questions, and there'll be a breakout session time as well as we get towards the end. Am I missing anything important, Laura, before we start?
No, I think that's everything. Feel free to use the chat, and Remco will monitor that for us as well. And we'll have some Q&A and then breakout time at the end where we can get into smaller groups and have additional discussion.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Also, of course, John Carpenter with GDS is here with us as well, and he can chat with you as we finish out the session today. And of course, Remco is here with us as well. You can see him. So excellent. Very glad to have you all here again, and thanks for doing this and being here during these remaining COVID days, which I hope are numbered at this point, but we'll see what happens. Again, thank you for that. Without further ado, Roland, I will pass the baton on to you. Grab the stage and share with us. We look forward to it.
Good stuff. Well, let me start by sharing the screen so you can get something going. Right. Good morning, data modeling enthusiasts. Well, as this presentation title says, we're going to talk about meaningful data today. But what meaningful data really is up to people's opinion, right? It really is in the eye of the beholder. So before going into the details a bit more, I'd like to start this session by sharing more of a personal statement on what it means to be working with data for me. Because you see, I always say that the data is just stuff, right? Data is evidence of events that are frozen in time in the systems that we work with that persist there, so we can uncover them and analyze them if we choose to do so. And in this way, this process of uncovering and analyzing data, I like to think it's similar to how, for example, paleontologists carefully unearth ancient skeletons and footprints and use these artifacts, these fossils, these bones and everything to piece together what actually happened at that lost moment in time. So, and it's similar to, again, how, for example, biologists use the same fossil record to figure out what actually happened with evolution, how that unfolded, and enrich our collective understanding of how everything works. And sometimes basically redrawing the tree of life as a result. And what we see here are different visualizations of this tree of life. And it's a visual that attempts to explain the relationships between the living things and their closeness together as species based on the genetic materials and their characteristics. And I really find it's a great analogy for what it means to work with data, because our model, so our interpretation of things, is only as good as the information we have at a point in time. And when new knowledge becomes available, these views and these models may and probably should change. And if we bring that closer to home to working with data again, data itself can also be defined as a byproduct of business processes. And business processes themselves are essentially orchestrated sets of activities designed to reach a specific goal. Or, in other words, the things that people do day to day, their job, right? Their work. And all these actions that people do, they create these data breadcrumbs, these events, this evidence of human activity that persists in our computer systems. And without understanding these processes, this context, this data is usually truly hard to understand up front. And this is one of the problems that the aforementioned paleontologists and biologists have as well, right? You can only work with what you got. And we can use this data to perform forensics and define hypotheses on and everything like that. But we only when we have the data and the context available, we really understand what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. And the scientists, as we mentioned earlier, they know that new evidence and new understanding may mean that what is presently believed to be correct is something that may need to be adjusted or rewritten, because new findings can have a big impact on these earlier assumptions. And it often requires the initial artifacts to be reviewed and examined in a different light, and maybe reaching different conclusions. And we've been doing that for a couple of 100 years using the scientific method. And during those processes, more context is provided that increases and supports our understanding of what is real and what is still being clarified. And as I said, this is a great analogy for data in my mind, because I find that working with data in our businesses is pretty similar. We often find ways to extract data, collect data from these, what we refer to as feeding systems or source systems, and we collect that into a central environment for analysis. And these systems are the IT applications that support these business processes I mentioned earlier, the transactional systems or the operational systems in our business. But the thing is, not only there are many of them, but they appear in many different types, designs, levels of quality, consistency, and reliability. And as a result, they changed a lot as well, of course. So, and when data is created by following those business processes, then it's based on the understanding of how that process works at that point in time. And the deposit I want to make here is that we can only correctly interpret data if we understand the processes under which influence this data is being created, the context. And it's interesting because in some cases this is pretty clear, and you walk into an organization and there's plenty of subject matter expertise available. But in other cases, data may be years old and created by systems that are no longer even in production, or the processes have changed over time and independent of the physical storage of data, which means that the data that is stored in a given format may mean something completely different depending on when it was created. So the interpretation of data can change, but this perspective is not recorded anywhere. You probably have seen cases like this. And in other cases, subject matter expertise may be limited or not available at all. So it's of questionable quality. And all of this still assumes that we actually follow the processes we document. So there are many reasons why it may not always be immediately clear what the data really means. And this is why designing for change is so important. And it's one of the things that is core to our beliefs on how we should do data warehousing. In other words, it's okay to change, right? It's fine to adapt over time. You're not modeling, you're not designing a fixed rigid form the data has to conform to. There has to be an allowance for a degree of flexibility to be able to manage this. And I think that's very logical because, again, more on a personal note, but if I look at the many projects I've done over the years, I always look back and, after a project and think, I probably, with the knowledge I've gained throughout this, doing this project, I probably would have done something different, right? Because you gain understanding of the context by working with the data, by asking questions and things like that. But you need to build up the body of knowledge. And I don't think there's many people that complete a project and say, this is no doubt the best information model it could ever have been, right? There's always a degree of progressive insights. And I think about the evolution of organizations themselves as well, because people come and go, and the knowledge is created somewhere and then it gets lost and it gets rebuilt somewhere, and people are getting hired and systems change and all of that. And in bigger companies, no one has the full understanding of everything. And the way I look at it is that if people that work in a certain company for years struggle sometimes to have that overview, have that understanding, that full picture, that should tell us something about new staff or consultants coming in to give you a model, right? It's often an incomplete picture at the best of time. And I don't think this is wrong or bad. I'm just saying that I like to see it as a starting point for further development and growth and adaptation, and not as the end result. So, it's okay to change, and being open to that and designing your systems and your architectures and your deployment and everything like that, your mindset. That also means that it's possible to start small and think big to use the term, but it's to build your target model incrementally. And think about it. If you design your target model in this massive, carefully normalized picture of how everything should be, you need to have that full picture first before you start developing, because everything, is related together, right? With references and stuff like that. And you gotta think that is it realistic to be able to capture all of that in time for nothing to change in the company? And if it changed, can you keep up with the change? Right? We can't stop. We can't ask the whole business to stop just to get the model done. So changing is important. And Genesee, Remco and Hans, they use the term ELM to define this variety of hybrid modeling approaches, such as data vault and similar. There are a few. And they all address this by making it easier to start somewhere and adapt. So you don't need the full picture up front, just an understanding of the subject area you want to capture, you want to flesh out, and a rough idea where you get the data from. So it's a smaller scope with a targeted result. And based on that, you can grow your model and refresh it and refactor it and extend it over time. And I keep coming back to this thing that that somebody said to me once in a presentation, and I will introduce myself a little bit later. But I'm a very practical guy. I like automation. I like coding, and I like refactoring, because refactoring is the technical means to do all of this, right? So you go back and tweak it a little bit. And somebody said, if you're refactoring, it just means you got it wrong the first time. And I was like, yep, that's probably right, but I'm okay with it, because it's a process, and I don't assume I've got all the knowledge up front. So I think that's a good thing. But so far so good. But why does it still feel like implementing change is like we're changing the tires of our car while we're driving, such as these friends in Saudi Arabia that are doing on this photo here? It sounds so easy, designing for change, but it's still hard to make it work when things are in motion. And this is where the technology comes in. This is where you have to have a solid development pipeline, conventions, testing, all that kind of stuff, DevOps, that make a refactoring of your data solution easy. So it's that whole top-down view of modeling, deploying and then deriving a physical model by convention, generating code, deploying, running, testing, and that goes over and over again. That iterative process, that's what still draws me to data warehousing. It's the potential to automate and to do it well. And today we're going to have a go with it, right? We're going to see if we can do so. So I'm Roland Vos, as Hans mentioned. We've known each other for many years, me, Hans, and Remco, and also, of course, the Varigence team. I'm a data warehouse specialist, and I call myself automation enthusiast because it's sort of a hobby, and it always has been a hobby for me. I've been working in data in many roles for a long time, and I really looked at it from different perspectives. I've been a consultant, been a trainer, been a manager, a decision maker in the corporate area, and I'm a software developer. So data warehousing, which is the ability to forward engineer data solutions, data warehouse automation, I should say, has been a consistent factor throughout those years of work. And after working as a BI consultant, I've got in touch with Dan Lindstedt as early as the early 2000s. And became involved in data vault methodology, which, as I said earlier, I really like because of its potential for automation. And doing that for a while, it's only logical that these days I work with Varigence, which is a leading software in data warehouse automation. So when I changed jobs, people said, "Oh, you need a new hobby now, right? You made your work your hobby. So what's your new hobby going to be? Imagine all the time you will have." Of course, it didn't work like that, but you may have heard of Biml, especially if you've been active in the Microsoft space. So Biml is, and I will talk about it a little bit later, but it's a domain-specific language to describe your data solution. and it gets compiled into a variety of code deliverables. And on top of that, we develop a product called BimlFlex, which allows you to map your data solution and then forward engineer the structures and data logistics, the ETL or ELT or whatever processes for a whole bunch of architectures that you can then configure. So that's what I'm working on these days. And that's also the platform that we'll be using today to generate some, hopefully, meaningful data outcomes. So if this session is of interest and you wanna see some more, we communicate a lot on the BimlFlex website and a Varigence blog, and I also have a personal blog at fully-fledged.com. So there's a lot of content available. There's a lot of good stuff that's worthy of some of your attention if you find yourself for a new hobby as I am. But this session is about business models, and I was talking about business models and meaningful data. So how can we make sure we keep this front and center in our development and design journey so that we can manage these changes I've been talking about? So the business models, and it's a little bit sad sometimes, but nothing is forever, unfortunately. And this is true for both operational systems and business models as well. They both evolve over time, right? They're not, neither of them are static. But the thing is that business models, they don't evolve as fast as operational systems do. And this is why business models are valuable for design purposes, because they are less prone to change. They are also less prone to bias from specific applications and how they do cool things. And the thinking here is, and you can see it on the left-hand side a little bit of the slide, operational systems, they replace certain core company functions and business processes, but they do that in their own way, right? They use their own terminology, they use their own structures, they use their own way of doing things in general. In most cases, though, that's still related to something that is probably not as different from the last system it was doing, functionally speaking. So this business model is more of that functional view where you stick to the core concepts and then describe what should be happening. And in the operational systems is whatever the tool of the day is doing to support that. And again, it's not that the business model doesn't change, right? People, companies enter new markets, they create new products, they also change that, but it's not as fast. So the trick here is to have that business perspective for design purposes, again, to avoid that bias that can creep into some designs when you actually do use the operational system to define how you call and do things. It's to remove that bias, to have a little bit more of an abstract view. And then mapping the data that is generated by these systems, is this evidence of human activity, to that model, and do that in a structured way. That's the key to delivering meaningful data, in my view. So it will be more future-proof. It will be better because of that bias I mentioned a couple of times. And you're still working with the same concept, right? So you're not all of a sudden creating a completely new system with new, new features or new concepts. You're still building a data solution. You still need to solve the same problems, basically, and you use the same kind of technologies. But it will be easier to integrate new systems because even though they may have different names for things, they would largely still follow the same concepts. And then because of that, we can map them to existing concepts more easily. So before we go into to a bit more practical detail, I'd like to note that conceptually, this approach of thinking big and starting small is not necessarily incompatible with the idea of having this big upfront holistic model of the entire business and all this data. I like to think that it's still something you'd want, right? So you still want to have this model of everything somewhere at some point. But I see it more as a noble goal that you want to pursue, and it's not something you commit to your data warehouse architecture to. You're not building your system for that. You're building your system to change, so you can gradually reach that that ultimate goal of having the integrated view of everything. So it's just a different mindset. It's not that you don't want it; it's that you work towards it. And you can call it your north star or your guiding light or something like that. But it's something that you may even never get to because of all the change and keeping up with things and priorities. You may never get there. It will shift. But the better you are at automation, at DevOps, at these kinds of developments, maybe the closer you get, right? So you can get really close to this this ideal, if you like. So that, I think that's the highest achievement. It also avoids you from problems like solving clashing definitions in with your solution. I've got this thing, and I've done it, and I think it's fun. If you can't agree on definitions, you just, from a data warehousing perspective or data solution perspective, you just you show different, maybe competing definitions. So you say, we've got the same base data, the same evidence, same facts, and the one system goes, the one area looks at the definition like finance, for example, looks at the customer in a certain way, and sales looks at it in a different way. And this is a true thing. Instead of me as a data warehouse or data solution solving that problem and having one definition and at least annoying somebody, we're like, well, just here are two competing views. We can support both. You both have what you want. Now you duke it out, and the winner, I would say the one that leaves the room alive, gets to give us back the real definition, and we commit it in our design metadata and forward engineer the change from there. And I think that's how it should work. So it becomes a data governance problem to fix. It's not something you fix with your data warehouse. That's my view. So yeah, let's get started. That time is short. I've already been talking about 15 minutes, and we have about 45 minutes for the whole presentation. So yeah, that's we do have some time for questions and breakout after this session, of course. But yeah, we should get into the details. For today, I would like to use and to share this example insurance case study. I've got a background in insurance, worked for a few years, which can help us show how to map the business models to the physical models and forward engineer our solutions from there. So let's go to CoverUp. So CoverUp is our fictional insurance company, and CoverUp intends to provide an example of how a real-world scenario can be used for business modeling and to deliver meaningful outcomes in an incremental way. So if we look at the slides, we see that CoverUp is a new and disruptive player in insurance, and they adopt a direct model, direct consumer model. So focusing on online sales and customer experience and stuff like that. So to maximize the revenue and still deliver a really good service. So this customer centricity is important, and as a company, they need to understand what happens in their portal, right, in their purchase path, and how the customer reacts at different things that are being shown to them, and how that leads to conversion and sales and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting case where we capture information about what customers are doing without knowing exactly who they are. So every step of the process, you learn more effectively. And at some point, if there is a sale, we can glue all these steps in the past together to get a sense of how effective our purchase path and our sales channels are. So that's what I wanted to do. And as a company, we'd like to understand how many quotes lead to a sale, a conversion, right? So somebody checks different prices and then says, yeah, I'm happy with this, this cost against this cover, and I'm gonna buy this. That's a conversion. And also what kind of benefits end up not being selected in the end. And this is what we're trying to do. Now, how we are going to do that is is using ELM, and our tools support for that. And the next couple of slides, we want to show in principle how that process works before going to the tool and actually do it. And what we want to achieve is really to build something that that captures this experience of modeling with a group of people in the room, with post-its and discussions and this engagement that that in-person workshops brings, right? And I'm sure you've done many workshops with Remco. I know I have, and it's that kind of energy where you talk about things and you have a conversation, you immerse things around. That kind of experience is something we'd like to support with the software product we're developing, and that's what we try to do. So this approach, and again, this is basically recapping ELM in our tool, right? But it works a bit as follows. Where did my slideshow go? So we first capture the models. We create a model which is a big canvas, and we start capturing everything, right? So we have the conversation about what's happening in our in the business process, what's in our company, and we start putting the proverbial post-its on the screen. So we capture within a certain scenario, we capture the involved steps and process, the concepts and process steps, and then we organize them by type. So we classify them, and then we have this conversation about, what would be the right term for this? Do we want to remove this one? Do we want to say this is the same as the other one? So we put the post-it on the other on the existing post-it, so to speak. And then we also look at at whether specific elements that we've captured are really concepts or really attributes. So we can say this is really a property of this thing, and we bring that overview of everything together to a list of classified core business concepts that we think are the real ones. So that's not everything. We also have the events, and most of the time, not all, but most of the time, things that happen are related to an event in ELM. So what we want to do is to understand from all these concepts we've captured and defined, which event does it really align to? So which are related, and also for specific events where concepts aren't related, we're just going to remove them from the canvas. So we go for this big overview of everything to smaller overviews that say these concepts relate to this thing happening in the real world. And then we can map that to diagrams and then say, within the scope of that event, this is what's important, but doesn't mean that there's no other relationships that we need to highlight, right? In some cases, we want to say, and we'll see that today as well, that even though, in this example, a policy and a plan are both involved with the policy seal, there's also a relationship between them, which is more of a natural relationship. And we can add some notes around that as well. So as I said, this is nothing new. This is ELM stuff. And this is how it works. So we start capturing all the information in our business model. And the next step is then to understand which elements are similar. So we're going to drag these tiles, these post-its to others and say, these are synonyms. These are same as something else. And then we classify what we think are attributes to the system, and we map them to the existing business concepts. Then we zoom into one of these events and we say, this event only applies to a certain number of business concepts. And the rest we just remove, right? And we do that for each event. Again, we're following the ELM steps here. With that information, we can then build the diagram and then put together how everything should be related. That's what we're going to do. So that's the concept. There was a quick recap. If we look at the scenario, we follow this this guy, Mike, and Mike goes online to consider looking for a policy for his family, his wife and 3 kids. And during that process, he checks a couple of options. He looks at this quote and he says, "No, the silver plan, not really for me. I've looked at the gold one. It's way too expensive. I'm going to go to the silver one anyway. I'm going to play with the benefits and the access a little bit." And through that process, he looks at different information, and in all the while in the backend, the system keeps recording these breadcrumbs of human activity, right? This data. And at the end, he then says, "This is the quote I'm interested in, and I'm going to save that. And to save it, I need to create an account, right? I need to create a membership of sorts." And this is where we can start gluing all these breadcrumbs together. Next day, he will go and purchase that. So if we only look at the first two sentences, so this is the scenario, right? This is our scope of how we want to model this particular thing. And we want to use this to answer the question, like how many quotes does it take for somebody to buy something? Then we pick the first two sentences and we say, "Yep, all right, so these are the things that we can see." And this is, it's not really a right or wrong thing, right? It's an interactive, engaging kind of workshop atmosphere where we talk about the key concepts and put them on the canvas. So for us in this use case, this is what we'll get. We have quotes. We will have more, and we will see more. But a quotation would involve Mike online, benefits, limits, premium, right? Those kinds of things. But there's also a lot of stuff that we can add while we're going through the process. For example, how do we want to, what is Mike and what is Mike's wife, right? Are we talking about the policyholder or an additional insured? Do we call this a customer? Do we call this an owner of cover? We need to sort it out. And this is what the first step is of getting those terms and definitions ready. So the last slide, or the last two slides I have before we go into the technology a little bit further, is that while we do this, and this is important to understand the end result, while we work through that scenario, in the systems, this is what happens. So you get a person asking for a quote, asking for a different quote, asking for a different quote, asking for, well, basically it's the same quote as the first one, but it's technically still a new service call, right? A new quotation from the quote service. And then he saves the account, and at that point, we see that this anonymous user that's been browsing our website is actually, a real life human called Mike. This all happens in the same session. So imagine that if you're online and you're working on in the browser, there's a rule in place that says if we you can implement it in different ways, which is sort of not too relevant for this, but imagine, if you will, that you're online and you track all the steps the first time somebody hits your website until they leave, right? And we may not know anything about that person, but we do know that all these clicks or all these actions, they are related to the same session, the same person. But if you see here, as you can see on the screen, only in the 5th row, we know more about this person, but we can use the session information to infer that the previous rows were also from that person because they're in the same session, right? So we go back in time and add more context. When this guy saves the quote, this is when a customer is created in the backend policy management system. So you've got the quote service on the one hand, policy management in the other hand. And while you do that, you also create default customer records, or however you want to call it, in the system. And the next day, this same Mike fellow goes back and captures the saved quote, which is basically a way to keep the price and think about it for a night. And then purchases, fills in the medical conditions and whatever. And that means that at that point, a policy is created. So you've got a whole workflow of things that are happening relating ultimately to a conversion, a sale. So that's what happens in the system. And what you'll see is that you have a couple of different systems. The quote service, which is really transactional and just captures whatever happens. We've got sort of the more traditional administrative backend systems, which has master record tables, customer master, policy master. stuff like that, right? So this is what happens in the systems, and we need to map these things together. So we need to be able to map this to this business model, and then generate a solution that gives us the answer to the question we started with. How many steps did it take to convert? That's it, right? That's what we're going to do in a nutshell. I'm just checking the time. I'm dead on time. Great, excellent. Because we don't need that much time to go through the details. I don't want to bore you guys too much with technical things running and showing, right? We've got breakout sessions. You can always reach out to us. The contact details will be on the screen later as well. But I do want to give you an overview of how stuff works and how we get there, especially, of course, for the modeling. And I want to show the answer. So to do that, I need to show a little bit about how BimlFlex works. Otherwise, some of the terms may be a little bit foreign. But at the end of the day, we have this user interface we call the BimlFlex app, where we do all the design and the modeling. So the business models will go into the design. We just key them in and have this interactive workshop supported by the things that Remco and Hans do. And that information is stored in our metadata repository. So we've got this database that captures all our designs effectively. Then we can start importing the sources against those models, and we can start completing the mapping between the physical data storage and our business view of the world. All of that still goes into the repository. We have an Excel plugin that we can use to also bulk change updates, which may be necessary from time to time, but most of the work will be done in the app. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. But once we are done with our design, we then switch tools and we say, yeah, this is the metadata. This is everything that we want. But now we're going to connect to that using a development tool that picks up that metadata and creates this Biml language content out of it. And this is important because it means that we're not just generating SQL all the time out of metadata, right? You can do that in an Excel sheet if you want. We think it's important to have a design environment that uses a domain-specific language, Biml in this case, that allows us to compile that into different target artifacts. So for example, in SSIS, in SQL, in ADF, using data flow mappings, using execute pipelines. So whatever that target format is, that's the native format that things run in. That's the Biml language is sort of the intermediary between that. It also means that, and that's visible here, we can add our own code there. So if for whatever reason the many settings and configurations and everything that we want to design the system with is not enough, we can always add or inject or somehow include logic that uses Biml and C# or VB or SQL or whatever, and then override all kinds of things. So it's a complete development environment. I think that's pretty cool. So that gets compiled, as I said, into these different artifacts, and then we deploy it to whatever the target environment needs to be. All these things are integrated with the runtime repository, which is really just capturing when did things run, how often did everything go okay, and that information is then visible again in the user interface. So that's what BimlFlex is. The important topics here are: got the app, we do the modeling, we import the sources, we connect to that metadata using our development environment, see if there's anything we want to tweak, deploy it to Azure, for example. That's it. So let's switch, right? So if we go to the tool, then we let me see, how do I get rid of this? Oh, well, doesn't matter. If we see this the screen here, then the first thing we see is that I've started a project which is basically empty, right? And as a good TV chef, I've prepared a couple of steps in the process so we can go through the whole mechanism quickly. This took a couple of hours to set up yesterday. We really don't have that much time. So instead, I've created a project which has a business model, which we'll go to, and we're going to map that business model to metadata we import here in the connections. So if you go to the business model, you can see that the canvas that we have here is basically the total of all the concepts we've captured in our workshops. And this is where we can do the synonyms. So I can say Mike is a customer. Right, it's known as a customer. Mike's wife is an additional insured. Online and portal, which one do we want to do? We want to stick to portal. So portal will be our business term, right? This is the mechanism you're working through this. You can also say this customer and the policyholder is this one. We want to stick to owner of cover, and then customer and owner of cover. We want to merge all of them together. That owner of cover is our key core business concept we want to continue working with. And this is where we also then apply attributes. So age can be an attribute of this one. So then this is how we're going to continue through this modeling mechanism, and we end up with a canvas that has everything related to the scenario. The next step is to go and create a specific view of the event. And this is where we say, look, this one, not really interested. These two are relevant for the conversion event. These are involved with that event. It is online. We're not really interested in the medical checklist, the pre-existing conditions checklist. We're going to remove it. We're going to remove this one. Oh, sorry, for different screen. Remove this one. Remove this one. Remove this one. So we end up with this view of stuff that is relevant for this event. Again, the same you would do in your ELN workshops. With that information, we can then look at the result in a more diagram view, and also then map relationships that may exist to other things. Right, so we can start playing around with the information a little bit and identify natural relationships and create keyed instances and stuff like that if we choose to do so. So in a nutshell, we're taking the scenario, we're mapping everything in an initial view that has the benefit that we standardize on common terms. So this business model is then available, and we're going to switch to. No, I'm going to go to connections, and then basically what a connection in BimlFlex is just literally a connection to a data set. So we import the source metadata, and we'll then map it to our business project. So again, I've already set up the connections, which is to SQL Server, to Azure Synapse in this case, and it supports a large number of other connections, but that's not really relevant for this presentation. The thing is that if I want to import the metadata, I basically do that, and this information will then become available in my connection here. So now I've got a starter business model, and I've got my data, however it is available in the system, in the solution here. That will now be sort of fast forwarded, if you like, to include all the sources. I've got 6 here, I've got 1 here, I've got 1 here, and I've already completed the business model. So I end up with a couple of a lesser amount of concepts and a couple of specific views related to events. So the thing with BimlFlex, if we're going to map information to the target business model, that's configured from here. So if we import this information, what BimlFlex will do, it will create additional keys based on the internal references and constraints and stuff like that. But you know, systems are dodgy, right? We can't trust them. So we need to make sure that the structure will start morphing toward what we want it to be. And this is where we need to build all these role-playing references that build the connections between data sets, how we want them, and not how they are captured in the source system. So for example, and probably the best example is to go to the schema diagram here, is to pick up our policy master. And I'm gonna show the column. So I've got this table here or this metadata set here that is from a policy master tables. And I've got this quote service table here that I can add. And I know that I want to relate the policy to the quote, because otherwise I can't manage the calculate conversion, right? So I'm going here and create this integration key, is what BimlFlex call it. And I'm going to say, I've got a quote. And this quote will be related to this one. So I'm building up linkages between my data sets that will guide me in my code generation later. So this is still prepping, right? So if I've done that, if I said, okay, I've looked at all my data sources and I've made sure it's all tidied up and everything is a key, and I can historize it easily, and I can do all the sort of the basic things, I can then go and actually map the information. Again, I got my business model here, which hasn't changed. I've got my connections here, and I've tidied up the sources a little bit to make sure that the linkages exist however I want them. Now I can go into this accelerator function, which is one of the ways you can use the BimlFlex application to design your target structure and do this mapping I keep talking about. So it starts with a very technical view. So basically it looks at the references, the ratio between tables from the metadata as it exists, and it builds, for example, a data vault model. So if you got this data vault model, it's a very technical data vault model, which is not really what we want. And we need to modify that to make it what we want. And that's what we're going to do quickly here. So for example, if I take this policy master, straight out from the references, we can see that, and I'll put the columns there as well, but straight from the references, we can see there's a relationship between the policy and the plan, which is something that we've inherited from the source. But there's also a relationship to the quote, which is something we'd created in the previous step, right? Remember, we drawing that line between the two data sets, that basically saying we want this to be created as a relationship. And we can then start doing things like this concept, this physical model thing, we map it to one of our business entities. So this is where we say policy master. It really is a policy business entity, which means that future sources that we map here will also be, the policy business entity. And the more things we add, the more we can start tidying this up, right? I can, for example, call this the plan. The plan should be here somewhere. And we should be good. So more and more. This is also where you, so you build out your model and tidy it up. And this is also where you do things like, I'm going to remove this from, I'm not interested in it for now. Or I'm going to select a couple of attributes. And I'm going to split it into something completely different. For example, I can details things. So you can add some technical, more technical oriented switches in there to make it work like this. And there's like billions of settings that I won't go into today because we don't have time. But suffice it to say that you extend this model into something that will be, will be your target mapping.
Roland, two things, because we are coming kind of to an end, and I see that Jonas had a question, and I will read the question for you. What happens when you have multiple sources, let's say customers, and link them to the same entity in the business model? So do integration out of multiple choices into one hub or link or satellite, whatever.
Yeah. Let me fast forward a little bit to the derived view. So if we look at the full model, which I will again, I've been through the motions and did all that. So I created some derived objects, like what you call business data vault objects, and that gives you the full picture, right? And I need to show this to answer that question. You've got the policy. Policy links to a quote. The quote links to a cluster, which is a derived view to glue all these records together. So we need to be able to add layers of business logic and interpretations that have been added to the system here, and this is where we can start answering that. Now, if you have multiple systems mapping to the same object, there's a couple of things you can do. So here in the side pane, you can see for whatever object what the source mappings are, if you like. So this is where multiple sources map to the one thing. If you want to specifically call this something, if you want to have all these mappings created as their own integration points, they can't be the same business concept, right? So you would create a separate business concept to explain what the difference is, and then you would map it to that, and it would be two, in this case, hubs, and a relationship between them if you want. So this is probably the quickest answer. These are the source mappings. And if you want it to be something different, you give it a different business entity. So to
Great answer. So what you mean is if a source system says, well, in this case, you have a quote, but I have a different source system, and it also has something like a quote, but it's not quite a quote. So you will make from a business perspective, of course, a second hub calling whatever name you're going to give it. And then, you know, it's not the same, but they're kind of the same, but not completely the same.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. That, or, and of course, and the alternative is to have two things initially and then have a derived view that brings it together. It's but yeah, that's the tweak. So that's part of the development work. I want to show that ultimately, once we bring it all together, and this is something that is worth showing really quickly. I know I've got a couple of minutes, and I should have picked that up, but it's left my screen. So 1 sec.
It's always happening with demos, right?
Yeah, it's bizarre where the screen went.
But I think
so
I can already, because if you're on it and you just say when you're on it, I personally, I can say I'm very happy with the way it's working altogether. I hope everybody sees the process and see how it's running, because we're really benefiting out to go from a perspective of a business towards the technical part. So really work from two sides in the end to get the model going.
Yep. And I'll start wrapping up. So basically, what we're opening now is the development tool, so Biml Studio. So we connect to the metadata, all the designs and all the derivation, all the business logic we've implemented in the last 5 minutes. And what it shows you is this interpretation of the metadata here in its target form. So if we set the compiler to output a certain kind of technology, this is what you'll see. And this is where you can add your own Biml logic, right? I'm not going to go into that, but it shows you all the artifacts that you'll create. You'll build it. The build process will start putting all of that together and creating the scripts and the templates and everything you need to deploy that code to whatever target environment it is in SSIS or SQL or Azure and stuff like that. So that will be built, and once that's available, that's let me I was logged out of my my Azure account for no reasons. So if I go into Azure and I deploy that, I can then go to my environment. And apologies, I need to open it up again. To the data factory. Look at the data factory. And then see that all the information that we have been designing is then available in for example, ADF pipelines. So this is the forward engineering part, right? So the design can keep changing. You keep building the solution into whatever it needs to be, and it will update whatever needs to be done. And you can run it like here. And just to wrap that up, if we end up running the examples, we end up with, in this case, a fact table in Synapse, and we can start running the result. And we see that this quote has had 6 revisions, which means the quote to fill ratio is 0.1667. So we know that a couple of steps have been done to pick that up, but it's really, this really serves to show that once you completed all the mapping and the modeling and the forward engineering, you can just run these queries and you can see the answers to questions such as that. So I am aware I'm a little bit getting off time here. So what I wanted to do is to just start the breakout, and we can always talk more about this stuff, right? There's
so much more to tell, Roland.
Yeah. So I just wanted
yeah.
to reach out that saying, if you want to know more about the technical stuff and how the tool works and how you can do this yourselves, please reach out to our offices. And pretty soon, this release that I'm showing here, which has the business modeling features and all the nice things around it, that will be done really short term. And we will continue to work on integrating governance and business modeling processes and make it the real best experience it possibly can be. So I want to say thanks, because we are out of time, but
we are out of time. I want to thank you very much, Roland. I'm opening up for questions now in the group, and before we go into breakout room. To start off with, I have a small question already, or maybe a big question, because you were starting off your presentation about be ready for change, and there's always change coming in.
Yep.
What happens if we are going to have a change? If, for instance, our model is going to change, how easy is it to have that one going?
Yeah. So what will happen is that you will of course implement the changes in your in the app, right? So you make different mappings and you create different linkages and that kind of stuff. So when you connect from that with your build tools, your in this case the Biml Studio environment, it will then create the updated list of artifacts, and you build that into something that can then be pushed as a change to the server. So technically speaking, for example, the tooling will create the data tools projects, which then can do a compare and merge against the target data structures and things like that. So it will create a diff for you.
Cool. Any more urgent questions for Roland at the moment? Please raise your hand, type in a question. If you want to wait until you are in the breakout rooms, Roland, then please do so. I have one request, because I know how it works with virtual. When we're going into breakout rooms, please make sure that your camera is on, that Roland can or John can see who we're talking to, because that's making life a little bit easier. But any questions at the moment?
I think we have to go to the chat for those, right? So I see.
Yeah, but there's nothing on the chat yet. The question was from Jonas. That's the only question we had. And oh, there's a good one coming in from Steve.
There's one from Steve. Yeah.
If I already have a data vault, is there a way to easily start a business model?
Yeah, there's no reverse engineering feature that we've built at this stage. This is really the first version of the software. So you would look at the model and then type things in, but it's typing these in is super easy, because you basically you basically go, and I'm not sharing the screen anymore, right?
Yeah, you are.
Basically go hello world here. So you quickly key in all kinds of things in the system. So it's probably at this stage the easiest way, but it's something we could consider for later.
Yeah. If I can add on this one as well, this question, Steve, if you don't have a business model yet and you yet have a data vault model, I think this is, and you feel that you need to map the business towards a model like this, it's a good starting point to get workshops and get your own workshops going and get to this part. And then I think there's a way to have, I have my data vault model and you can connect it really in the data model, I guess, your data vault, Roland, from a more source-oriented perspective, and then get the connection going, right?
Yeah. It's literally that. It's mapping your sources to whatever you want it to be. Yeah.
And I heard from Adam, what about migrating from a non-data vault data warehouse to data vault? Do you need a business model?
No, you can also apply the business model to other architectures like a dimensional model or just a staging. But you don't do that in the accelerator. The accelerator is really meant to create like a 3-tiered solution design, including an integration layer such as data vault. If you want something else, you would go to the target object straight away and say this is that one, but it doesn't have a visual editor like I showed you today.
By the way, Adam, I can tell you from experience that the business model is always preferred and going to help you a lot quicker than not using a business model. But that's preaching from my own perspective, right? So, but that will also help. Yeah. Okay. I think it's more time now to go into the breakout room. I think that's more where more questions can be asked to Roland. If you want to have any chat with John about what we can offer from Global Data Summit and if you have some new topics you want to discuss with us, I think Lara will open up 2 breakout rooms. I'm not sure if I think Roland, you will probably going into room 1 and John going to be in room 2.
Yep.
And I'll jump around.
Yeah, so the breakout rooms are ready. I'll hit open rooms in just a second. Attendees, you will be able to self-select to put yourself in the room that you would like to go in. If for some reason that is not available to you, just type in the chat for me which room you want to go in and I can put you there.
Yeah. And before everybody jumps into the breakout rooms, I would, Roland, again, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. I love the way the work you've done with, of course, with I see Peter is in the well with the team. Great job, well done. Thanks for everybody attending. We want to do more of these sessions. You heard Hans telling it up front. Hopefully, again, somewhere in a nice area. We were always talking about Rome. So who knows? But we will have more sessions like the one from Roland from other interesting topics. All right, it's all up to you now.